Okay, invite everybody to be with us in Matthew chapter 8, following up on immediately after the Sermon on the Mount. Before we ever start this lesson, and we can do it later, anybody got something on your mind about a study for us on Wednesday nights? A book, a subject, whatever. Willing to think about anything. No? We'll be thinking about that. We'll stop early tonight and talk about it again. See. Last time Jay suggested the Sermon on the Mount, was there not something else that was suggested that we kind of liked? Do you remember? I don't. But I thought maybe we had another good one. Okay, in our lesson last week, as we got to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, at the end of that time where Jesus was talking to all these people, the Bible told us how the people's reaction, the people were amazed. Jesus was a different kind of teacher. Rather than just relaying information that he had maybe learned and trying to pass it on, the people would said that Jesus taught them with authority. He taught them with authority. And it was as if he knew exactly what he was talking about. And even as if he had the right and the power to explain it and to say what he said. Because Jesus, what was Jesus doing in the Sermon on the Mount? Was Jesus just reminding people of what the rules of life were? How did Jesus start each one of those sections? You remember? You have heard, right? That it was said, that it's been said, and he would say, but then what did he say? But I say. In other words, Jesus felt like he had the authority to say something different, to add to it, to explain it, whatever he was doing. And so we can see that in the way that he preached. I don't know how anybody else in this day and time could teach like Jesus, or anybody else in his day and time. And I don't even exactly think he's the way, when you compare Jesus with the prophets, and the prophets were speaking for God, but the prophets just said what God told them to say. I don't think they commented on it necessarily or added their own thoughts to it when they did that. But Jesus is. And so the people say, well, he's obviously, he's not like all the other teachers, especially not like the scribes, but he teaches as if he has authority. And he did. And we talked about that quite a bit. So, chapter 8 begins, and Jesus is coming down off of the mountain. I wonder what it looked like. I wonder what that scene was like. I doubt that sermon just took the amount of time that it would take us to read. I mean, reading 3 chapters, Dodie, how long would it take us to do that if we read it out loud? 15 or 20 minutes maybe at the very most. I have an idea that there was much more to it than that. And one thing that makes me think that is the only other account we have of the Sermon on the Mount is by Luke, and I think that's in Luke 8. And Luke only gives a small part of it. But if you didn't know that was a part of the Sermon on the Mount, because it's what Matthew's got, if there wasn't another place where part of the Sermon on the Mount was recorded, you would have just thought that was it, But I feel like a lot of times, in the Bible, I think God's made sure we get everything that we need. But Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels. And sometimes at least two of them, sometimes three, and on occasion, all four of them tell the same story. But you know what? It's never told exactly the same way. But isn't that normal? If 3 or 4 people in here went to watch a ball game, Kenny, you think the next day when we told everybody about the ball game, we'd tell them the very same, all 4 of us would say the very same thing?
All 4 of us would be different.
I'm sure it would be. And we might all be telling the truth. We might all be giving a truthful account, but we wouldn't tell the very same things. We might pick out what was important to us. And they get through and you think one thing, she thinks another. Yeah. I think that happens to a lot of us from time to time. Well, Jesus is coming down from this mountain, and obviously it's had a lot of influence. The next line there says that great crowds followed him. That's something that is really starting to happen. We're at the point in Jesus' ministry when he is becoming extremely popular. Now, how much of that popularity is due to his preaching, and how much of that popularity is due to something else? Because what else is Jesus doing? He is performing miraculous works. And that is amazing to people. I'm sure it's amazing for people just to witness it, but for those who are receiving those things from Jesus, you can just imagine. And what we're going to see in chapter 8 is that kind of thing is going to continue. And Jesus talks about this in several places in the gospel. What is the purpose of Jesus performing these miracles? Why is he doing this? And there's not more than one reason. It's not one simple answer. Why is Jesus performing miracles upon people who need help? I believe that's probably, from what we're told, that's probably the number one reason. The influence that it'll have on people to believe that he is the Son of God. And those who come to Jesus, that's something that's a point in their belief that they're going to have to come to. This man is the Son of God. What do we, from what the Bible teaches later on from Pentecost after, and it still takes place in this building today, before we baptize someone, what do we ask them to do? Confess what? That Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Exactly. That we still do that today. And so these people, through these miraculous works that they were seeing, surely many of them were being convinced that yes, this man is the Son of God. Nobody else could do anything like that. What are some other reasons, though? Can you think of anything? What are other reasons why Jesus would do this? Okay, no, there's nobody else like him. Nobody had been able to do this. Obviously, that sets him apart. That makes him different in a good, positive way above all the others. What do you think Jesus is thinking? You think every time Jesus decides whether or not to heal somebody, you think He's thinking, well, wonder how many people this might make to believe. But He might be thinking something else.
After He healed the leper, I was reading verse 4 there, it says, see that you tell no one, but go your way. Show yourself to the priest.
Right.
For the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. So after He healed them, He said, go your way, but show yourself to no one.
And that has kind of baffled us a little bit, Ruthie, and I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but I think it has to do with that first verse in verse 8 where it says He's got great crowds following Him. I think He became so popular that it became very difficult for Him to be able to get around. But He does that with some others as well and challenges them that way. I don't know how to get there without just telling. Did Jesus care about people who were struggling and suffering? Yeah. There's another reason Jesus performed miracles, because He cared about people. And if there was a leper that came to Him and needed healed, then the Bible says on several occasions, Jesus is moved with compassion. Jesus sees the person's need, and He wants to respond. He wants to do what He can do for them. And so He does. Or He does if He can. And when I say He can, I don't mean His power is limited. But you know, when Jesus was in His own country, I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but He was in and around Nazareth. And eventually, the Bible tells us that Jesus didn't perform very many miracles around Nazareth. You know why it says He didn't perform very many? That's right, Rick. Because they didn't believe in Him. And if the people didn't believe, then He didn't work in their lives. And we'll see that in these examples tonight. Well, yes. Always, Kenny, and I think that's one of the themes that rings true through almost every time Jesus encounters somebody and there's a miracle to be performed and Jesus is going to do something for them. There's very few times that their faith is not a part of the equation. If they believed, then Jesus rewarded that belief. Who did Jesus have harsh words for? People that didn't believe. The Pharisees, the scribes. How many scribes did He heal? How many of the chief men, the leaders of the Jews? How many of those did He ever heal? Well, they didn't believe in Him. They couldn't put their faith in Him. And so this leper comes. Behold, a leper came to Him and knelt before Him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. Okay. If you will, I guess can kind of have two kinds of meanings. But it seems to me that one of them would be the same thing as saying, you can make me clean. It's kind of, if you'll do it, you can do it. So I don't really think He's saying, if you'll do it, you can do it. I think when He says to Jesus, if you will, what is the other way that Jesus' will has anything to do with this? There's another way to use that word. You have a will, don't you? And I don't mean about dying. You have a will to do things sometimes, don't you? Margaret, I happen to know that you're pretty loyal and faithful to things that go on at Cartwright Grove. You have a will to do that, don't you? Yes, you do. And so you're there, and you're doing what you can for that building that you and David see over and work in. So I really think that's what the man is saying to Jesus. Jesus, if you have the will, you can do this. You can do this if you will to do it. If you want to do it, you can do this. Which is saying what about the man, the leper? What did he believe? Yeah, he believed that Jesus could heal him. If Jesus decided to do it, he believed he could. And immediately, and Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest. Offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. Ruthie read that to us a moment ago. Here, it seems like Jesus is, by saying, don't say anything to anyone, and he did on other occasions, it sounds like Jesus doesn't want anybody else to know. But from this chapter and what goes on in this chapter and others, it's not that nobody knows who Jesus is or nobody's following him. He's too popular almost right now. And it's challenging and difficult. But he's still working in the lives of people. And that last part, I had to find out what a leper was supposed to do. If a person who had leprosy was somehow healed from leprosy, and I think that was pretty uncommon. But so I went and read about it, and it's in Leviticus. I want to say it's in Leviticus 24 or 22. Anyway, I read, and it is fascinating. If you want to read something fascinating, go read, because depending on how much money you had, you might have to sacrifice 2 lambs, but if you couldn't afford 2 lambs, you could use turtle doves or pigeons, depending on, again, how much money you had. And one of the birds was slaughtered, and the priest took the blood and put it on your earlobe, and they put it on your big toe, and they put it on, I think, the thumb on one hand. And there was this ritual that they went through, and the priest had to be involved, because, what kind of, how do I ask it without saying it? Was leprosy contagious? Yes, it was. And it was a dreaded disease. And so, Kenny, if you've had leprosy and one day you come into a crowd of people and you tell everybody, you don't have to worry, I've been cleansed, what might those people want? Yeah, they want to know some proof. It's like, wait a minute, how did this happen? Can you prove to us that you don't have this anymore? Because we're afraid of you, right? All right. Well, when people in these days, in Jesus' time, when they had leprosy, it was the priest that eventually gave them the authority to go back to their normal lives and to engage in public life again. They couldn't do it without the permission of the priest. And so they had to go to them in this ritual. And I just wish that I had some understanding of why God had them do what He did. But I don't understand blood on the earlobe, Rick. I don't understand on your big toe and your thumb. You know? It was the blood from one of the birds. Yeah, and they had to be, by the way, it had to be a clean bird, which means one you would eat. It couldn't be an unclean bird. I don't think a crow would have worked. Yeah, it had to. That's why if you couldn't afford the lambs, you could use a turtle dove or a pigeon, I think I said. And it just went, because it talked about, poor people might be healed too, and they don't have the money to buy a lamb or 2 lambs and sacrifice them. So it's just fascinating, those kinds of things in the old law. But I bet there was some kind of meaning to that. The faith of a centurion is next. What is a centurion? A soldier. Who had soldiers around in Judea in the first century? The Romans. This is not about a Jewish person, okay? A citizen. This is a centurion in the Roman army, which means he's most likely what? Nationality or race or whatever. He's not Jewish, is he? Most likely. He's a Gentile. So, he has a servant. And he says in verse 8, he's lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. But this is interesting, what happens. Jesus says to him, I'll come and heal him. But the centurion stops him. What does the centurion say? Here's another thing. I know it was in my sermon a few weeks ago. What is the centurion showing, Dodie? What's that word we use? If you belittle yourself before someone like I'm not worthy, it's humility. And there again, we see time and time again in the Bible where God rewards people who will humble themselves before Him. And here this centurion is humbling himself before the Son of God. And he said, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come into my house. And he knew, he doesn't say it, but he knows this is going to be really weird if Jesus does. Because why would Jesus have anything to do with a man like this? And then he even goes on and comments, and Jesus is very impressed. What does he say? I tell somebody, one of my people that are under me, and I tell them to go, and they go. And I tell another one to come, and he comes. And I have a servant, and I give them a responsibility, and whatever I tell them to do, they go and do. It gets done. And after he says to that, what's he doing there? He's explaining to Jesus what? That's right. He's over 100 people, isn't he? And so he's saying, I get things done, and all I do is give the order. And what's he saying to Jesus? You can do it. Lord, you don't have to go to my house. You don't have to touch my servant. All you've got to do is say for them to be healed, and they'll be healed. Now, that's faith, isn't it? That's somebody, again, who has faith in Jesus. I, too, am a man under authority. I, too, means who else is? Who else is a man with authority? Jesus. He acknowledges in that statement that Jesus has authority. And so, Jesus marvels, verse 10, and said to those who followed Him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. What a compliment for this man. But I know I've said this quite a few times lately, it seems like in our lessons. I just don't want you to miss it. Here's another example. The man that has more faith than Jesus has not seen in Israel is a foreigner, right? I'm telling you, the Bible is full of those kinds of stories. And I can't think, it seems to me that there's a very good reason why that keeps happening more and more and more. And it's to make sure that those of us who perhaps think, hey, I'm a white American and I live in Farmington, Kentucky. It's real nice. We got better morals than everybody else, and we're a good community. And I go to church. Be careful. Be careful, because you know what? We may not be the people of faith that we ought to be, and there may be people out there that we never think of that have a lot more faith than we do. And God, that's my story. Every time I tell the story of Rahab, every time I tell the story of Ruth, a Moabite woman and a harlot from Jericho. And they're two of the three women listed in the genealogy of Jesus. And the other one is Solomon's wife is mentioned. By the way, she's an adulteress. So God continually, I think, puts that in front of us. If we think too much of ourselves, God keeps showing us example after example of the least likely. What did Jesus say? Oh, in the days of Elijah, when Ahab was trying to kill him, there were all kinds of Jewish widows in Israel, but God sent him to the widow of Zarephath, who was a foreigner, to take care of him, because God knew she had more faith than those women that should have been women of faith. And we just see that time and time again. And here in this story we see it again. At the last, Jesus is kind of explaining this. He's telling us something kind of similar to what I've just tried to say. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. Coming from the east and the west, to me that's represented, they're coming from everywhere, from all over the world. And who are they sitting down to eat with? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So where's that taking place? In a spiritual kingdom, exactly. It's got to be heaven. It's said to be the kingdom of heaven. While the sons of the kingdom, who would that be? While the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's your everyday typical Jewish person living in Judea in the days of Jesus. What's Jesus saying? There's going to be a lot of people come from far away places that are one day going to sit down and eat with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And there's going to be people that have watched me walk by their front door and who have heard me preach. And they're going to be in a place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's Jesus' message. We don't want to miss it. We want to give it heed. We want to pay attention. To the centurion, Jesus said, "Go, let it be done for you as you have believed." And the servant was healed at that very moment. Neat. Well, maybe we ought to stop. Have you got any idea? How do you think about something when we're thinking about a lesson? I don't know. But I really wish we could. Got any ideas? Is there any suggestions about our study going on from here? You like studying a book? You like studying a subject? We spent some time looking at some people before this. Wouldn't have to be a whole book, just like we just did 3 chapters in Matthew. Any suggestions? Any ideas? Well, and I can, I guess. I think, I was telling Penny the other day, I get the Northside Bulletin, or I see it on, they put it on Facebook, and I don't know if I follow them or I just looked at it so much that it always comes up on mine. And I was telling Penny the Bible, Don Riley's teaching a class on a textual study of the book of James, starting the quarter in December. And I was telling her what they were doing. Of course, we have Kelsey and her family, and Will and the kids are going to church there, and so it's of interest to us. And I think to myself, I bet you that each one of those teachers picked out their own subject. They probably did. Somebody might have suggested something, and they considered it. And I can pick out something, but I'd love to have suggestions as well. Well, we've got about a little more than 5 more minutes, so let's look at the next story. Jesus heals many. A couple of interesting things here. Jesus entered Peter's house. That's got to be the Apostle Peter. He saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. Yes, Rick. When I read that, I'm almost surprised they didn't put his name in there again, because in the ESV sometimes will put a name in and there'll be a note by it, and if you look down in the note, it says the Greek word said he, but they wanted to make sure you knew who he was, and so they put their name in there. Right. But yes, it's Peter's mother-in-law. I don't want to be ugly. I don't want...
Mine says he saw Peter's mother-in-law.
Yeah. Yeah, yours says that? Okay. Yeah, and then he said, right, he saw his mother-in-law. Okay. It depends on the version then. They wanted to make sure. That's interesting, because there are religious people who think Peter was the first head of the church and that person is not allowed to be married. But obviously Peter was. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and began to serve. Just something very simple. I find it interesting that Matthew included that, but it gives us another side of Jesus. He's going to this place where he's obviously welcome. And all these other stories we've seen with people that he probably had never even seen before. He's meeting for the first time. Here he goes into a home where he knows the people that are there. His apostle, the home of the family of one of the apostles, and he goes in there, and there's a woman has a fever, Peter's mother-in-law, and Jesus heals her. That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases. I've never really heard that one commented on before. That last, in Isaiah 53, let me just turn and read a little bit of that, because you'll hear something very similar. Well, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. It's interesting to me, and I'm not sure if we're missing something there. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases. And here in verse 4 of Isaiah 53, surely He has borne our griefs. I don't know if that simply means that Jesus healed people, but when it says that He bore our griefs, what does that sound like to you? Yeah, it does, Rick. And I don't understand that completely. I'm wondering if there's more to it there than just the fact that the disease is healed. But I don't know. But what Jesus was doing in healing this people, obviously, from what Matthew tells us, is a fulfillment of the prophecy that Isaiah gives in Isaiah 53. Starting in verse 18, now when Jesus saw a crowd around Him, He gave orders to go over to the other side. We're not even told, but if we get down a few more verses, they're by the lake, it's probably Lake Gennesaret, which is just close to the Sea of Galilee. It's on up the river, I think, from that. But anyway, let's go to the other side. A scribe came up and said to Him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." A bold statement, but it sounds like the man means it when he says it, perhaps. He comes up to Jesus, and maybe this man heard Jesus give the apostles the orders, "We're going to get in the boat and go over on the other side." And this man is saying, "I'm going to follow you wherever you go. I'm going to go wherever you go." But I want us to listen to what Jesus says. Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay His head." What is that response? What does He mean by giving that response, do you think? Guys, get in the boat. Let's get in the boat and we're going to go over to the other side. And this man hears that and he looks at Jesus and says, "I'm going to follow you wherever it is you go." And Jesus responds with, "Well, foxes and birds, they've all got nests and holes in the ground, places to go. But I don't have anywhere." What might be the message to that man that Jesus is giving?
I want you to know what you're getting into. You're going to be.
I think that's it, Dina. I think Jesus is saying to that man, "Well, let me tell you, if you're going to follow me anywhere and everywhere I go and going to try to be like me, you're not going to have a place you can call your own. You may not like where you have to go if you follow me and what you have to do. It's going to be difficult. It can be challenging. It's not going to be easy. You're going to follow Jesus. You're going to have to make some tough decisions. You're going to have to give up some things. You're going to have to suffer and struggle." Dina, I think that's the message Jesus is saying. You want to follow me? Where are we going to go and lay our head down? I ain't got a place. Another of His disciples said to Him, "Lord," this is similar to it, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." That sounds like a pretty important deal to me. Jesus said to him, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead." Wow. Now, dead people can't bury dead people unless we understand what Jesus is saying. What kind of dead people could bury dead people? The spiritually dead could bury people who had died. And to me, both of these statements And it goes back somewhat to what Dina said about the previous one. I think that Jesus is just saying, this is quite a commitment to make, to follow after me. It's not going to be easy. It can be hard, it can be challenging, and it can be difficult. Why would Jesus say something that almost sounds harsh and cruel, doesn't it? A little bit. My dad died, Lord, and the funeral's tomorrow. And Jesus would say, I'm leaving today. If you won't go with me, we got to go. I think it's just an emphasis on, if you're committed to Jesus, He's got to be the big commitment. It's not like, oh, I'm committing my life to Jesus, and I'm going to do what He says whenever I don't have anything else I want to do. So, maybe not that simple, but I think Jesus is challenging us. Let me first go and bury my father. No, if you really want to follow me, don't let all the things that happen in this world distract you. You need to commit to following me. Okay, I went a minute or two over. Thinking tonight, I'm going to do my best to have something picked out by Sunday so that it can be announced Sunday morning, and you'll know what our Wednesday night study is going to be.
I've often wondered what it would be like to be demon possessed.
Oh, me, Kenny.
And that's all in the Bible.
Right. I have not, and there may be lots of information out there that I just haven't seen.